Hello, welcome back to the winter collection. And this is the most wintry part because today we're going to do a programme that's devoted to comfort food and starting off with casseroles and braised dishes. But if you haven't made a casserole before, I just want to run through some of the important points. The recipe I'm going to show you first is braised lamb with flageolet beans. And what I've got here in my pan is little nuggets, neck fillet. It's not an expensive cut, but it's absolutely superb for casseroling and braising. And I've been browning this, and that's the first principle of casseroling and braising, is that sometimes you need to brown the meat. Because what happens is you seal in the juices, it goes into a hot pan, you seal in the juices, and all this lovely sort of crusty bit that forms while you're sealing in the juices gives you a lots of flavour to the finished casserole. And so here it is, 2 pounds of neck of lamb fillets nicely browned. And now what I'm going to do is put about a tablespoon of oil. It had 1 tablespoon to brown, and now I'm adding another tablespoon. And what I'm next going to do is add some onions to the pan. And what I've got here are 2 large onions, and they've been sliced, and then the slice is cut in half. Quite thickly, about 1/2 inch thick. And what's going to happen now is really they're going to have the same treatment. They're going to be browned in the pan, because what happens with onions, when you brown them and they become toasted at the edges, they give a lovely, lovely flavour to the finished sauce. Now, while they're browning, I'm going to show you the next ingredient, and these are flageolet beans. And flageolet beans are beans that are harvested when they're young and green and then dried. And one of the good things about using pulses like this in casseroles is that the pulses, as well as having flavour of their own, absorb the meat flavours. And so you can actually, if you use pulses, you can actually make the meat go a lot further. Now what you do with those is you soak them overnight in cold water, and they then absorb some of the water and become much bigger. Or if you forget to soak them overnight, you can just pop them into a saucepan, cover them with water, bring them up to the boil, and boil them for 10 minutes and leave them for 2 hours to soak, and they'll look the same. Once the onions have browned, you then add 2 cloves of garlic, finely chopped, and let those just cook for a minute with the onion juices. And then I just want to explain to you about thickening. To thicken the sauce, you add some flour at this stage. And I've got here 1 ounce of flour. And what you do is just sprinkle it in, and then just turn it around in the pan and just let the flour sort of soak up the juices. And although it looks sort of lumpy and not very nice at this stage, don't get into a panic, because all will be well later on. Next we need some stock, and here I've got a pint of lamb stock, and I'm just going to gradually stir in the stock into the onion and flour mixture. And if you think I've been very caring and devoted and standing making stock with lamb bones, you're wrong. I actually got 2 tubs of lamb stock from the supermarket, and that's one of the things that's very nice about cooking now in the 90s, is that you can go and buy stock ready-made, which is very helpful. Next, I'm going to return the meat, the browned meat, to the pan, followed by the soaked flageolet beans. They're going to go in next. And we'll just give them a little stir to get them down into the juices. And I'm going to add some pepper now, but no salt. And that's a little rule to remember. When you're using pulses, don't season with salt until after, because what we want is for them to absorb the juices, and the salt discourages that. So we'll just give it a nice seasoning of freshly milled pepper. Salt comes later. Now a couple of bay leaves. And I've got here a dessert spoon of fresh chopped thyme leaves, and the thyme and the lamb have a wonderful affinity. Just a few little sprigs of thyme, too, just scattered here and there over the surface. You can see it's come back to simmering point now. A lid goes on, and then it's transferred into a preheated oven, gas mark 1 or the equivalent, and the first stage of the cooking is 1.5 hours. Well, now 1.5 hours is up, and the next thing is I'm going to add one more ingredient. And that ingredient will just finish off the sauce nicely. This is ½ a pound of cherry tomatoes. And what I've done with these is I've just put them into boiling water, counted 30 seconds, and then just slipped off the skins. And what they will do now is just cook down into the sauce and give a lovely enrichment to it. And it'll need another hour. Here it is, 2.5 hours cooking all together. And remember, what you need to do before you serve it is give it a good salting and taste it to check that you've got enough salt, because we didn't put any salt in the beginning. And the good news about this is don't be deceived by its simplicity, and don't be tempted to do what I have done, and that is cook it with wine, because it doesn't taste any better cooked with wine. Just leave it simple like this. So that's it, braised lamb with flageolets. Well, today I'm going to show you what I consider to be my own top 10 collection of casseroles and braised dishes, and the next one certainly belongs to that category. This is braised meatballs in goulash sauce. First, you need 12 ounces each of minced pork and beef, 1 small onion and ½ a red pepper finely chopped, 2 ounces of breadcrumbs, a crushed clove of garlic, 2 tablespoons of fresh chopped parsley and an egg. Season well with salt and pepper and then mix all these very thoroughly together. Then shape into 24 small rounds, coat with flour and fry in hot oil. Once they're brown all over, remove them to a plate, then in the same pan begin to make the goulash sauce. First by adding some more oil, then the other half of the red pepper finely chopped and a large onion finely chopped. Cook these for about 5 minutes, then add 1 pound of peeled chopped ripe tomatoes and a rounded tablespoon of hot Hungarian paprika. Now return the meatballs to the pan containing the sauce, cover and cook very slowly for 1.5 hours at gas mark 1 or the equivalent. Finally, add some creme fraiche to the sauce, a little bit more paprika, then serve the meatballs on spinach noodles tossed in butter and poppy seeds. Well, one of the special joys of cooking is that very often you get a visual feast as well as an edible feast. And the next recipe I want to show you, which is braised steak with 5 kinds of mushrooms, begins with a visual feast, and that is how very, very beautiful mushrooms are. In fact, I think a lot of food is a work of art all by itself. Now, the first kind of mushrooms in our group of 5 is this one here. This one is dark gilled mushrooms, nice flat dark gilled mushrooms, which give a really good flavour, much better than the boring little button mushrooms. The next one, these are chestnut mushrooms, and these are actually all available in the supermarket, but I've been this morning to a supermarket supplier who's picked these fresh for me. Now, when they've been on the shelf a little while, they look sort of brown like this, but when they're freshly picked in the morning, they look pink. But these are chestnut mushrooms, that's the second kind. And then we need some wild mushrooms to give that lovely intense flavour, to back up the other flavours. And these are actually porcini mushrooms. And porcini mushrooms have been gathered in their season and then dried, and they're soaked, as we did in the second programme in the series. So that's porcini. Next, we're going to be a little bit oriental and look at oyster mushrooms. And there are 2 kinds of oyster mushrooms. They're the blue kind, and these are very, very pretty. They're sort of grey-blue and have lovely, lovely white gills on them. And they also come in this colour, yellow oyster mushrooms. And again, the beauty of it, when you see the light coming through the gills and this lovely splash of colour, it really is quite extraordinary. And still keeping with the Eastern flavour, the last kind of mushrooms we've got are these. These are shiitake mushrooms, and they're also very, very beautiful. If you pick one up and look at it straight on, it looks like a little Chinese coolie hat and has all these beautiful patterns on top of it. And so there we have the 5 kinds of mushrooms. Now we'll make the recipe. What I've done over here is in my frying pan, I've been browning some braising steak, and I've got 2 pounds of braising steak. This recipe can serve either 4 or 6 people, depending how much steak you want. And then, after browning the braising steak, I added a little bit more oil, and I've browned the onions. And I've got 2 onions here, and they've just been cut into chunks like this and nicely tinged brown at the edges. Now, what I've got in my frying pan here is the residue and the oil left over from frying the meat and the onions, and I've added a knob of butter to that. And now I'm just going to begin to make the sauce by adding some flour to that, just to make the basis of the sauce. And the flour is going to be mixed into the fat, and then I'm going to gradually add some liquid. And the first lot of liquid I'm going to add, you remember the porcini mushrooms? We've used ½ an ounce of porcini, and they've been soaked in warm water and then strained and chopped. And this is the soaking water, and the soaking water is wonderful, beautiful, porcini-flavoured stock. So that's going to go in now. Little by little, stirring all the time. Now, halfway through adding the porcini stock, you need to switch from a wooden spoon to this, which is a balloon whisk. Right, then as soon as the last of the porcini stock has been incorporated, we're now going to add another ingredient, a very special ingredient, and that is this, which is Madeira wine. And that's going to go in a little at a time. And this is dry Madeira. It's sometimes called Cercial, sometimes just called Special. But it's got a lovely, nutty flavour. And somehow or other, the flavour of Madeira and mushrooms is just out of this world. They have an incredible affinity, Madeira and mushrooms, especially when they're cooked long and slow together, which is what we're going to do here. So as soon as all the Madeira has been incorporated, now the sauce is smooth, you can add a bit more. The next thing we're going to do is just return the meat to the sauce. And so we'll just put that in now. 4 pieces of meat. And as I said before, this can serve 4 to 6 people. If you want to trim it down into 6, it depends how much meat you like to eat. Followed by the onions, which I'm just going to place around the meat. They've already been browned. And then what's left on my meat plate here are lots of lovely juices. So they're going to be incorporated next. Put the juices in. Finally, the soaked porcini mushrooms, they're going to be sprinkled in. So this is the first of our mushroom group of 5, and they go in at the beginning with a few sprigs of thyme and a bay leaf, and then good seasoning of salt and some freshly milled pepper. As soon as that comes up to simmering point, put a lid on, and then you put it into a really slow oven, just 130 degrees, and that'll take 1.5 hours for its initial cooking time. Then, after 1.5 hours, you add the second batch of mushrooms. In this case, it's 4 ounces of the chestnut mushrooms and 4 ounces of the dark gilled mushrooms. And obviously, cooking the steak in Madeira like this, what I'm now going to do is just spoon a little bit of the juices over the mushrooms. So there we are. Now we're going to put the lid back on, and that's going to go back into this very, very low oven and have another 1.5 hours cooking before the last part of the recipe. Just before you serve your braised steak with mushrooms and Madeira, You put a crushed clove of garlic and an ounce of butter in a pan like this, and then finally 6 ounces of shiitake mushrooms and 6 ounces of mixed oyster mushrooms. And we've got that lovely garlic-flavoured butter there, and all I'm going to do is just toss these around in the garlic butter and let them cook very briefly, no longer than about 2 minutes altogether, and then they're just used as a garnish. You'll see that I've sliced them all, but I've left 1 or 2 whole ones here, because it's quite nice to just have 1 or 2 whole ones to use for the garnish. Serve the steak, garnished with the mushrooms, and then just finally pour the sauce all over. Well, one of the good things about cold, icy weather is it gives me an excuse to make one of the great classic British dishes of all time, and that is steak and kidney pudding, or as it was affectionately known in the East End of London, Kate and Sydney. Well, we're going to make a classic steak and kidney pudding today, and first of all I just want to run through the ingredients. On the plate here I've got the said steak and kidney. I just want to tell you that the good thing about this is that it has all the lovely beefy flavours. So essential is ox kidney. No other kind of kidney will do it. Must be ox kidney. And then you need a cut of braising steak or braising beef, rather like this. This is actually chuck. But what you need is a little bit of marbling of fat in it, which will make the whole thing nice and juicy and succulent when it's cooked. But first of all, I want to show you how to make suet pastry for the steak and kidney pudding. And it's the easiest pastry in the world. You start off, in this case, with 3/4 pound of self-raising flour. Give it a good sifting, as I've shown you before, holding the sieve up high to give it a plenty of airing. And remember, it must be self-raising flour. It won't work with plain flour. Then what I'm going to do is give the flour a seasoning of salt and pepper, because this gives a nice sort of savoury touch to it. And then the next ingredient is half the flour's quantity, in this case 6 ounces, of shredded beef suet. So the beef suet goes in, and the easy bit is there's no rubbing in this one. All you do is take a knife and just mix the suet into the flour, and as soon as it looks sort of evenly blended, then you start to go in with some cold water. And just add a few drops of cold water and start to mix again with your knife, just using cutting movements and turning the mixture round. And the aim is to bring it all together to a dough that will eventually leave the bowl clean. Well, you can see that's quite lumpy, but I don't have anywhere near enough water. And you saw I was quite sort of bold pouring the water in. Well, in fact, suet pastry does take a lot more water than when you're making other kinds of pastry like short crust. Now it's beginning to get a little bit claggy, so what I'm now going to do is get rid of the knife and then go in with my hands and just bring it all together. And again, you can see there isn't enough water, so in we go again. What we want to end up with is a really nice elastic dough that leaves the bowl clean. Now what we need to do is, before we roll that out, is just take 1/4 of the pastry away, because that's going to form the lid. And then the next bit will have to be rolled out, ready to line the pudding basin. Now let me just show you the pudding basin first. Well, this one actually is 2.5 pints capacity, but when you're buying one in the shop, you can't really very easily measure it. So if you measure it across like that, 6.5 inches in diameter. And then, as you can see, it needs to be well buttered, the pudding basin. Well, now we're going to roll the suet pastry out, which is very easy to do. Floured surface, then flour your rolling pin. Have a nice straight-sided rolling pin without any handles, and just give it equal pressure with your hands at each end. And if you want a round, as we do, just get rid of that knife there, which is in the way, give it a 1/4 turn every now and then, and you'll see that it'll roll out into a round. It's very, very easy, very well-behaved pastry, suet pastry. It doesn't actually crack or give you any problems at all. This needs to be about 13 inches in diameter. And then it's almost there, I think. I'm using guesswork. Forgot to bring the measure. And then you just use that to line the pudding basin. So in it goes. And what you need to do here is it's like a sort of a tuck job, really, a squeezing and a tucking. Just press it in. It's terribly, terribly easy to do. Won't cause you any problems at all. And if you find you've got some thinner bits of pastry round the walls of the bowl, then you can just do a bit of patching with a bit left over. But this has gone in quite evenly, I think. But what I will do is some of these little bits at the edge here, I'm just going to take off and just give the pudding right at the base a little bit of reinforcement, because although it's not traditional to turn a steak and kidney pudding out, I like to turn it out. I like to be different. So there we are. There's the pudding basin lined. Now that is going to need the steak and kidney. So let me just run through what the ingredients are. 1.5 pounds of beef, which has been trimmed. 8 ounces of ox kidney cut very small, and a medium onion. And that's now going to have 2 tablespoons, level tablespoons of flour. And it's going to be coated in the flour, which has been seasoned with salt and pepper, well seasoned. So that's the seasoning. And then all you do is you just pile that straight into the basin with the pastry lining. And pack it in, pack it down tight. And then once it's all in, the next thing you need to do is provide some gravy. Now this is provided by this, which is just plain water. And what you do is you add enough water to just come up to the top of the meat. Wait a few seconds and let it sink down, because you want it to come right up to the top. And you don't actually need to use stock. You can use plain water here, because the gravy that comes from steak and kidney is just sensational. It really is. A few drops of Worcester sauce now, about a teaspoonful. And the next thing is I'm just going to dampen the edges of the pastry like this with my fingers. And then I'm going to just roll out the lid. And that's quite easy to do. Just roll it out again to a round, giving a few quarter turns till it looks, need a bit more flour on my rolling pin, until it looks big enough to go on the top. There we are. So then that goes on the top, and then where we put the water, we just seal it. If you've got some bits lapping over, don't worry, just tuck them in like that. And that's now ready to go into the steamer. So what you need to do before it actually goes into the steamer is protect the surface of the pudding. And what you do to do that is take a double square of kitchen foil and cover the pudding with it, but make a pleat in the centre first, because it's lovely and fluffy suet pastry when it's steamed, and it does rise up. So you need that little bit of pleat there to give it room to expand. And then tie it with string and make yourself a little handle like this, because when it's finished steaming, it's quite hot, and that just helps you to pull it out. Now, a steak and kidney pudding needs 5 hours steaming, but don't throw your hands up in horror, because there's nothing to do. You just leave it in the kitchen and come back at half-time and pour some more hot water into the steamer if it needs it. And then it's all ready to serve, no last-minute preparation. It's quite an easy thing, really. And if you're worried about steam in the kitchen from one pudding, if you just have a window open, you won't really have any bother. So in it goes, into the steamer. This is an old-fashioned kitchen steamer, not very expensive. You can use a fan steamer if you want to, but either way, 5 hours. Right, now the 5 hours is up, and the aroma is very, very tantalising. So what we need to do now is just have a look at it. Turn the heat out, and protect your hands carefully because it is hot. But don't forget, we've got the little piece of string to help us lift it out of the steamer. And that's why we had the pleat, so that it had room to kind of rise up. So now what we're going to do is take the string off and pull the foil off. Normally you'd wrap the pudding, traditionally rather, you'd wrap the pudding in a white linen napkin, carry it to the table in all its splendour and spoon it out. But I want you to have a look at it, so I'm going to turn it out. And in our house, we actually like to turn it out. So what you do first of all then is go round it with a palette knife and loosen the pastry from the edges of the bowl, like that. Need a good wide-bladed palette knife. Feel it loosen out. And then say a little prayer, and out it comes. And then take it to the table, steaming away like that, and see all the glory of that lovely juicy meat and all the gravy inside. So there it is. Kate and Sydney make a comeback. But now I've shown you how to make suet pastry, I'd like to show you another cold weather comfort food, another way of using it, and that is to make crusted dumplings. This is what they look like, same suet pastry but half the quantity, and adding 3 tablespoons of fresh chopped parsley. Shape them into rounds, pop them into the casserole, and then, without a lid, cook them for 30 minutes at gas mark 6. And now I just want to show you the complete winter collection of the top 10 braised dishes and casseroles. The first one I'm going to show you is a braised pot roast. This is good because it allows you to use the cuts of meat that aren't tender enough for plain roasting. This is in red wine and served with an onion marmalade. This is a braised version of a French classic, steak au poivre. This is braising steak with a pepper crust, slowly braised with red wine. This one is slowly braised oxtail in dark stout, and it's got mushrooms and cannellini beans. The beans soak up all the lovely oxtail flavours. This one here is chili con carne with a difference. This has black beans instead of red beans, is garnished at the end with a spoonful of creme fraiche and a chilled avocado salsa. This is a traditional Flemish recipe, carbonade of beef. It's beef braised in beer, topped with croutons and melting cheese. I'm going to be showing you this in a later programme. Remember this one from our first programme? Braised pork in cider vinegar sauce, served with spiced red cabbage and cranberries. My own particular favourite casserole here, this is a traditional Irish stew with crusted dumplings. Braised neck of lamb with flageolet beans. Meatballs and goulash sauce. And finally, braised steak with 5 kinds of mushrooms in a rich Madeira sauce. Right, well that's the complete winter collection for carnivores, that is. If you come back next time, there's a programme called The Soufflé and the Winter Vegetarian. See you then.